So let's get the opposition reaction. It's a pleasure to have back on the program the leader of the official opposition, Andrew Scheer. He joins us now. There's lots on the table again. Mr. Scheer, great to have you back, and I'm glad you and your family are well. But it was a marathon session last night to overcome the major political hurdles to get this legislation passed, just for Canadians who are concerned about what you described as a major power grab effort by this government to try to reroute around parliamentary oversight. Where did we end up in terms of what powers Parliament has to oversee the need for speedy and expeditious spending to deal with this pandemic?
Well, the good news is, Evan, that we were able to stop the power grab. We were hoping that the government would separate the financial assistance measures from the new tools they wanted to write themselves. At the end of the day, they chose not to do that. But at the end of the day, we were able to preserve parliamentary oversight, mechanisms for the House to be recalled if the House Finance or Health Committee is not satisfied with the government's handling of these issues. We brought in sunset clauses so that all of these new tools that the government claims they needed would end in September rather than December of 2021. So at the end of the day, we were satisfied that we had stopped that power grab and that we will still be able to have parliamentary accountability and scrutiny on the government's handling of these issues so that when they do make decisions, we can ask the questions on behalf of Canadians and point out where they're not getting the job done.
Yeah, I think it's important that Parliament doesn't get shunted aside in a time of crisis. But just to make sure I understand this, two things. Parliament will continue to sit, so we still have our democratic institutions, but this is not going to impede the speed of the government to respond and spend, will it? Is that key?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Parliament is due to come back to resume sitting on April 20th. In the meantime, a part of what we agreed to yesterday is to have the House of Commons Finance Committee meet every 2 weeks to look at what the government has done. And the government did make the case, and we acknowledge that in this time of unprecedented crisis where there's massive and escalating levels of unemployment, that there will be some needs to ensure, for example, that a hospital might not have the resources it needs, and that the government might need to quickly get money into a hospital. They might need to provide emergency assistance to individuals. So we believe that while the government will be able to do that, first of all, Parliament has agreed on the front end, and we built in some checks and balances to provide ongoing scrutiny and accountability. And as I said, I believe that's best for Canadians. You know, nobody wants. It's important for us to criticize the government. It's important, you know, when they say things like travelers returning to Canada will go through enhanced screening on one day, and then we see multiple days where people are coming back to Pearson Airport, standing in lines close together without hand sanitizer, without the information of the latest isolation directions. That we need to call them out for that, so they can address those problems.
Yeah. Listen, and I want people to also appreciate it's easy to be a COVID morning quarterback on everything. This is the most complex political challenge any government anywhere in the world has ever faced. And it's important that the role of opposition plays to enhance. Not everything's going to be got right. So I think that's important. But let me just quickly, are you satisfied, first of all, with the economic measures, how fast the government says it's going to try to get the now more than $100 billion out the door, and the $2,000 for workers who qualify a month for 4 months? Is that enough for you, Mr. Scheer?
Well, what we're really concerned about right now is making sure that there is a job to go back to for these individuals who are going to be receiving these benefits. We've pointed out to the government that the vast majority of small businesses have been ordered to keep their doors closed, ordered not to receive customers, and those small businesses will need some kind of assistance so that when the health component of this crisis is over, that there's actually stores and shops and restaurants for people to work at. So far in their package... So do they need to boost the support for small business? Well, exactly. You know, there's a 10% wage subsidy that they've proposed, but really for a restaurant, for many retail types of places, that's not going to cut it. There isn't any wages being paid at all because the stores and restaurants are closed. So what happens in 3 weeks, 6 weeks, when the health crisis is over, when the isolation measures are lifted, if there aren't small businesses reopening their doors, those workers will not have jobs to go back to. So that's what we think we should be focusing on in these, right away to prepare for.
Mr. Scheer, let me just ask you a question about this Quarantine Act. The government finally invoked the Quarantine Act today. So now it's illegal not to self-isolate if you're returning home to Canada. In your view, did they time this wrong? Is it too late? And how will they enforce this? That's going to be a big question. Are they literally going to arrest people if, they stop to get gas on the way back from the airport?
Well, it's a very good question. In terms of the timing, this is something that we were calling for earlier. And I just want to point out that there is a certain level of frustration on our side that we proposed an idea. For example, we proposed restricting travel from international locations. The government's answer was that closing the borders and restricting air travel was not effective. Just a couple of days later, they completely reversed themselves and ended up bringing in some of those travel bans that many other countries had done. On this Quarantine Act as well, we were saying a while ago, if somebody is in a risk category, if someone has returned from overseas or have been in contact with someone who has shown symptoms, those are the people that we should be focusing on in terms of self-isolating to prevent the spread. And now we find ourselves with a midnight kicking in of these effects. And as you heard the minister say, still no information to Canadians who might have to not be, stay at an airport hotel perhaps because they land in Calgary, they can't drive to Edmonton, or they land in Toronto, they can't drive to Mississauga or Barrie. So those are the types of things that, well, if you're going to wait to bring in these measures, you better have all the answers figured out when you do finally bring them in. And unfortunately, it looks like right now that's not the case.
All right, Mr. Scheer, I know we'll talk again. I appreciate you joining us after a marathon night. There's lots of discussion ahead in this crisis. Mr. Scheer, thanks for joining us, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Evan. Stay healthy.